of old men, very old men, showed up with their Confederate uniforms on. We're long after the Civil War, right? It's interesting what Faulkner has to say as he describes these old people. Confusing time, which is with its mathematical progression as the old do, to whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow, which no winter ever quite touches. The old people continue to live in the past without believing that it's the past. Then we're told that there's one room in the house that has not been opened for a long time, some 40 years. And we are told that that room is finally opened. They wait until Emily has been formally buried, and then they open the room. In the room, they find everything laid out as if it was a wedding night. In the bed, they find a skeleton. And of course, we know immediately, without Faulkner telling us, or the speaker of the story telling us, that of course this is who? Right, Homer Barron. There he is, lying in bed. Notice that it will be the telling of the story, either by Faulkner or the speaker of the story, right? That there's several things that we see at the bottom of 826. Upon the valance curtains of faded rose color, upon the rose shaded lights, and then to continue finally, the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. Of course, these adjectives of muted and discarded are just genius as we come to the very final thing of the story, the final point of the story. Two things. One, Homer Barron is dead. How did he get dead? Of course, this explains why she went and got arsenic, right? So in other words, she killed him. Now, why she kills him, we're not completely sure. There may be some sense that she killed him because he had said he's not the marrying kind, and maybe he had threatened that he would come and go as he pleased, and Emily was going to take care of that problem by giving him a bit of arsenic. The other thing, though, that we find out is only implied. Note the genius of the way Faulkner ends the story. We saw on the pillow next to him an indentation of where a head had laid many times, a long strand of iron gray hair, which immediately tells us what? That for a very long time, Emily would go up into the bedroom and lie next to the dead Homer Barron and sleep. End of story. All right, so there you go. That's the story. Let's now jump to level 1 really quickly. Can you reduce this story down to just a couple of lines? What is this story about at level 1? Can you just summarize? What would you say? An old woman who finally dies, who upon her death, we discover she has killed the man who we assume she was in love with. And not only has she killed him, but she sleeps at night, or slept at night next to his body for a long time. Wow. There you go, a level 1 reading of the story. Of course, at level 2A, we're going to have to ask some very pointed questions. Let's begin, though, with the question of the title. Some titles are so obvious, right? You pick up, for example, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. You know that this is a novel about somebody named Huckleberry Finn. The title is what we call self-evident. Other times, though, the title is a little more obscure. Note the title of this story, A Rose for Emily. Jot down at 2A, why is this story called A Rose for Emily? Does anyone have any idea of this one as you write it down in your notes? Some students have pointed out that Faulkner is playing all kinds of games, right? So, for example, the rose is symbolic of what Emily hoped for all her life. Love. Of course, finally she got love, and then she killed love, and the only mention of rose in the story is the color of the room as you walk into the bedroom, where for a long period of time, over 40 years, the room has been sealed shut like a coffin. Whoa. Okay? Some people have pointed out that calling it a rose for Emily is a way to surprise the reader, to say to the reader, you got no idea how this story is going to end. And of course, the way the story is told and written, it's almost as if the speaker of the story doesn't want to come right out and tell you that Emily Grierson was a weird, crazy loon of a person in our town who ultimately we discovered was a murderer on top of it, and we all kind of watched it happen, and nobody ever really investigated about Homer Barron and the stench that came out of the house, because that's the way it is in the South. We have to show proper respect to the wealthy, and Emily and her family at one time had been that. Very interesting. Of course, let's go ahead and point out some other messages, themes of the story. As in many Faulkner stories, you are going to have the struggle between the new and the old, the struggle that we would call generational. Of course, we could also think about the passing of the South, the end of the South in many ways, and Emily, of course, represents that South in a number of ways, doesn't she? She thinks of herself as somehow superior, somehow better, we might say. Let's jump now to 2b really quickly, and let's kind of talk about Faulkner's style and the way that he can tell a story by just showing us parts of the story. Notice that he tells us so much about this town of Jefferson. He tells us so much about the people of Jefferson without coming right out and telling it to us, but rather showing it to us. He, of course, is showing us as well what kind of town Jefferson is by showing us how that town responds to Emily. And, of course, what Emily is like as well, as a very interesting woman in her own right. Let's also point out in 2b that Faulkner, unlike Hemingway, as we said already, he loves these long, convoluted kinds of sentences, right? I mean, just go to page 827. We'll just kind of play this game in that last, second to the last paragraph. For a long while, we just stood there, comma, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin, full stop. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, comma, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, comma, that conquers even the grimace of love, comma, had cockled at him. What was left of him, rotting beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, semicolon. And upon him, and upon the pillow beside him, lay that even coating of the patient and bidding dust. So Faulkner loves these long kind of compounded sentences where he almost is like unfolding information as the reader reads. We will say, of course, about Faulkner's genius is that he can demonstrate or show without often telling. It's a brilliant, brilliant way to tell a story. Okay, let's jump to level 3 here really quickly. And let's talk a little bit about other titles that you are familiar with, right? The movie that you like best, where the girl gets the guy back when the guy messes around on her, and the way she gets him back is to jack him in some way. Do you have a favorite film about that? Do you have a favorite music video about that? Do you have a favorite song about that? Right? This is, of course, a story about revenge in a very interesting and twisted way. Right? Another way to ask this question about related to other titles or texts. What is for you your favorite text about an old person who has a very strange kind of way of behaving? Do you have an old person in a movie or an old person in a TV show that's just different from the way normal people behave in every way? What's your favorite text about the Deep South? Many of us have never traveled into the Deep South. For those of us who have, we will often report it is quite different when you, for example, visit Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana and you are from a place like Wyoming. You often will report there's a completely different kind of cultural feel. What is for you a text that kind of captures that? Finally, 3b. How you relate personally to this story. I've had students that say, this is kind of a freaky story when you finally wrap your brain around what's going on at the end of the story. This is kind of a horror story, which begs the question, what's scary about this story, if it is scary to you? let's ask this: what's tragic about this story to you, if it's tragic to you, or sad? What's sad about this story to you? Of course, the passing of time is always one way to relate to this story as well. Right? Is it kind of sad and pathetic to grow old? Who are the people in your life that you're watching grow older? And are you noticing or identifying the ways in which they're beginning to lose touch with reality, or beginning to lose touch with you as the young person? What is for you this distinction between young and old? Like, for example, watch this question. You can maybe write on this one. At what point in your life will you consider yourself no longer young? You'll consider yourself old. Is that an age? Is that a series of events that have to happen? For example, I've had a student once who said, I won't consider myself old until my parents have passed away. And then, when I have buried my parents, I will begin to think of myself as old. Other students have said, I won't think of myself as old until I stop working, and my children have grown up and left home, and I'm no longer working and I'm retired. Then I'll begin to think of myself as old. Or is for you age and becoming old not a function of age physically, but of the mind? In other words, like Emily, once she started to lose her mind, that's when she became old. Well, there you go. An introduction to Faulkner through the study of A Rose for Emily. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.